Hey, this is Matt Urtz, the Madison County historian. We are still working to document the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and how it has impacted different people, places, and things. Today we have Laine Gilmore, who does a little bit of everything, but she's a piano teacher and a genealogist. She volunteers for the local historical association, the Erieville-Nelson Heritage Society. Am I forgetting stuff here, Laine?
No, not really. I'm pretty multifaceted businesses.
There you go. So for those that aren't familiar, just talk a little bit about your different roles and how what it was like pre-COVID.
Well, I basically have two businesses. I have my Laine Gilmore Music Services, which is I teach private piano. I tune pianos, repair pianos. I've been a performing musician all my life, doing band work, doing solo gigs. And then my other business being Laine Gilmore Genealogical Research Services, which I got into around 2000 and into genealogy. And then in 2010, I took a certificate course for genealogy from Boston University, and then hung my shingle out with that. And in 2016 became co-historian for the town of Nelson. And so my day is quite multifaceted.
So I guess my question with COVID, one of the things I thought would happen when we shut down is I would get a lot more emails from people doing genealogy with questions. And I didn't get them until we actually reopened. And then I got flooded with people. Did you find that you got more requests when everything shut down, or?
No, I didn't actually. And I think in talking to a lot of my genealogy colleagues, we were all having a difficult time focusing on that kind of work. First of all, none of our repositories were open.
Right.
The only thing we had to work with was online research. And I did have people inquire, and I did tell them that I can't do a proper job without being able to access archival materials. And so a lot of them decided to hold off until, research could be done properly.
Okay. What about the piano side? Did you find that, were you even able to teach?
I was. I was alerted, well, really, I kind of saw this coming back in January. That's a different story, but a couple weeks before things really shut down here in Madison County, one of my students' parents had called me and said, we just are not comfortable bringing her to lessons. He said, if you can FaceTime with us, we would do that. And at that point, I immediately realized I got to put something in place for these. I have, 32, 34 students. And so I started working with them on FaceTime. And within a week and a half, 2 weeks, I was sending out emails to all my students. This is what's going to happen. Let me know if you want to Skype, FaceTime, or Zoom. And he had to put all three of those platforms in place in order to make it work. And within 2 weeks' time, they were all remote.
How is it different to do remote versus in person?
It's difficult. When you have a small child, you have to be right up at the piano with them. You have to move their hands. You have to point to the music. You have to count along with them. And so working with the young ones was probably the biggest challenge, because two things happened. Either the parent had to be in the room with them to do those physical things for me, pointing to the music and figuring out where they were, counting. So I'd have to have very oftentimes a parent in the room. If a parent wasn't in the room, the chance of a child running out of the room is much greater. And when you have a little child running out of the room, you can only hope that the parents find them around the house and bring them back to you. So that was probably the biggest challenge with older students. My middle school and high school students, they embraced it okay, and it was much easier to work with them like that. And they they adapted very well.
Well, and they were the ones that probably adapted easier to the distance learning type stuff.
Yeah.
How long did that process go on for you then?
The week of March 16th was my first week totally remote. I take that back. I had half remote that week and half in person. It was the following week. They were all remote. I did not have students come back in-house until mid-July.
Okay. What about the repairs and that kind of stuff? Did that?
Ooh, yeah, that time. The last piano I worked on was the week of March 16th, and I never got a phone call to tune a piano until late July again.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, calls started coming in.
Okay, so people themselves were actually the initiation of the business, because
Yeah.
you could, in theory, do that during the pandemic. Just people probably didn't want you in their homes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you found that students, now that you got them back in, have better habits, or is there any changes and stuff like that? Or
There is. They're very conscious of the whole COVID thing. Obviously, they're back in school. They're wearing their masks. As I started having my kids coming back in house, what I've done is I've closed off my waiting area, which is outside the door here. My studio's in my basement. I closed off the waiting area. I asked my parents to not come in unless it was absolutely necessary. I offered to them if they wanted to FaceTime or Skype or Zoom from their car in my driveway, they could, be in the lesson that way. I've had some new students start that I've allowed the parents to come in so they could be here for the first lesson. The rest, I tell my students to please come in with their mask on. I wear mine. Once we're sitting and they're sitting quietly at the piano, I can be 6 feet away from the piano.
Okay.
So if it's very hard to play the piano with a mask on because your peripheral vision, your eyes are constantly going up and down. So if I can, I let them take their mask off.
Okay.
They're faced away from me. And we're fairly safe here, and being one-on-one.
Okay. Do you typically have like a recital or something at the end of the year?
Yes. I do a recital in June, and for the past several years, we've done it down at the Nelson Odeon, which has been great. And it's a beautiful venue for that. And this year, in March, I started to make arrangements to figure out how I could do a recital. And how we decided to do it was each child recorded their piece at home, and then they sent their movies to me, and I put together a full recital movie and put it up on YouTube.
Okay. And how did that go over?
It was interesting. A lot of my kids that normally wouldn't be nervous doing a recital were more nervous recording it than they were playing it live, which surprised me because, I always have kids that are nervous at the recital, but a lot of them said this was really hard. It was very difficult for them to do. And I think it was because they had the opportunity to do a do-over. and to keep recording it until it was as perfect as, as they could make it.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, is if they were always unhappy with the results at the end. If they,
A lot of them were, but they finally accepted that perfection was not going to happen.
Yeah, we referenced a little bit. We were part of a conference last week, and we had one pre-recorded session, and the woman and I did it. The first time we did it, it worked great, but there was a problem with the video. Like there was a little line across the video, which we realized why afterwards, and we fixed it. And the second time when we knew how to fix it, we had like 6 takes. We would start, and 5 minutes in, we'd screw up so bad we had to restart. We would start, and 5 minutes, and I kind of wonder if that's what it was. Whereas if you just do it, you do it regardless of what happens, versus I have this capability. I know how I want it to look and appear and be. And now I even if I screw up, I can't just jump over it. I want to restart.
That's so true, because, when you're doing something live, and if you make a mistake, the mistake goes over people's heads. They might catch it at the moment, but 2 seconds later, they've forgotten it.
Right.
And with a recorded performance or whatever presentation, it's always there. I mean, their 2020 recital will be up on YouTube forever.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of those things. I'll ask a question about that in a second. I just want to go back. For the Erieville-Nelson Heritage Society, you guys typically have presentations in the summer, and they draw a crowd. You weren't able to do that because you weren't able to do in-person events per se?
Right.
Talk about some of the decision process that goes into what you guys were going to do, how you put it off, and what you're trying to do to engage your community now.
Well, we do our Hills and Hollows publication 3 times a year, and it takes those 4 months from start to finish to work on the Hills and Hollows. As far as any presentations go, I personally have been trying to get Erieville-Nelson Heritage Society to maybe do some ones on Zoom.
Yep.
But what we found is it's hard to find people that normally present that understand the technology involved in doing it, and they're shying away from it. And so, and then the other aspect of that is there's very few people in our organization right now that understand the technology to do it and to get it done. And although I do, I'm so tied up with Hills and Hollows and historian work that it's too hard for me to even think about trying to get a committee together to do that right now.
And that's the thing. There is, while this technology has been great, and while a lot of people have learned it, as we all did kind of on the fly, there's a percentage that aren't going to do it. And maybe if their grandkids in for that day, my mom just bought my 1-year-old nephew a shirt that said Grandma's Tech Support. He may be more capable in some ways, but yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that's come up, and you're not the first and you won't be the last we want to do digital programs, but not everyone's able to take part like with other ones.
Yeah. So, and we also have a lot of members that don't even have computers.
Right. Yeah.
We're an aging society that, a good share of our members are in their 70s and 80s, even 90s, and don't have a computer. So and the other difficult thing was our Hills and Hollows committee was trying to get them to meet online via Zoom, and none of them knew that technology. So I spent hours and hours on the phone trying to get, there's like 7 of us that get together once a week. And those first 3 weeks, I was calling them and saying, okay, walking them through it. Yep. And then the other thing was trying to edit the Hills and Hollows. And what we found is most of us on the committee have either Mac computers or iPads. And so I do the Hills and Hollows on Pages on my Mac. And so I was able to share the file with all of them and teach them how to put comments in where they felt there needed to be changes. So we were actually able to edit more thoroughly the last two issues, the May issue and the September issue, because everybody had access to it and had free time to do it. Whereas before we would get together and read it out loud and edit it together. And so I think there were a lot less mistakes in this one.
Well, and that leads into the next question. How will COVID change how you run your businesses and the historical organization kind of thing?
Well, it's going to change different aspects of different things in a lot of ways. With my piano students, I know now that if we do have to go back to remote learning, we can do it. I also know that if winter comes along and it's a really bad snowstorm out, I can text my parents and say, would you rather FaceTime tonight than coming out in the snow? So I think that's going to help my attendance for piano for teaching. As far as the Historical Society goes, going remote was a really good thing for the committee, because most of the people on that committee, like I said, are in their 70s and 80s. And for them, it's been a social hour as well as a working hour. And it's well needed for them. They're not getting out and they're
Right.
not, able to do much. So it's been good for that. And we may continue working that way as far as the Hills and Hollows goes. We're all antsy. We want to get back to the archives and get work done. And, we have to wait on that because the town office is closed and they don't want a lot of people in there at the same time. So.
And that's October, which we're recording this on September 29th. October is Archives Month. Every year since before I was historian in 2010, we have something called Archives Day. We've moved it to Archives Week. We've tried to adapt to that. And this year we're actually going into, when we're allowed, individual organizations' archives and kind of letting those organizations talk about their collections and stuff, which is great. But there's a few that are in your situation where it's in the town and it's not going to work out that we can get in there. And that's okay. We're all adapting to this moment in time on the fly. And still, even though we're 6 or 7 months into this, still kind of doing that. Because we are starting to open now, but the last stuff that I read said the numbers are going up again. So maybe we're not going to be open that long. We don't know. So
it's hard to say. I think we're all in that boat where we're wondering how long this is going to last.
Yeah, hopefully not much longer, but probably a lot longer.
I'm thankful to see my students back. The first week, which was the week before last, when they all came back, it was surreal to me. It was like these children were walking in, and I've only seen them online for 6 months, and all of a sudden these kids are walking in, and I'm realizing that kid has grown 4 inches in the last 6 months. But and there's a lot of things that I don't think we'll ever go back to normal. As a musician, I haven't played a gig since the week of March. Well, it was the week of March 16th. I had a solo gig at the Casanova Library. And it was funny because at the time it was for a little tea party. And I was like, I kind of laughed about it. I was like, after years of playing in clubs and this and that, here I was playing a tea party at the Casanova Library. But it was so funny because it was a big crowd, and it was a day that the kids had off from school. So people, grandparents and parents, had brought their kids to this tea party, and these kids had never done a tea party before, and the library had brought all these little beautiful teapots and, teacups and all that. And it was so much fun. I had so much fun at it. And then the next day, boom. And as a matter of fact, you and Alicia and I were going to do a presentation at the library that following Monday, and that was that. We didn't do it.
Yeah, and we talked about going digital, and we held off, and I don't think we've ever gotten back to it. But that'll be something we get to eventually, the next census.
Yeah. Let's hope. If we're all still around.
Yeah, that's going to be the key. One more question, and it just kind of dawned on me. What is the cleaning process for like the piano? Because I'm assuming that's a little bit touchy with what you clean it with, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, I found that out. As I started getting students back in, I, started researching what is going to be the best sanitizer for the piano, because it's a touchy-feely surface. And so I was told that the hydrogen peroxide would be the best one. So I invested in the wipes. Well, about a week into it, my beautiful piano keys started showing little stains, and they almost look like dirt stains. In fact, a couple of my kids have pointed it out, and I'm like, it's not dirt, it's clean. So then I had to rethink that. So I actually am making my own. I found a recipe, and it seems to be working. So,
and that's one of those things we don't think about. You can go on, a lot of places have talked about the increase in cost in buying commercial grade cleaners, but when you have a beautiful piece of equipment, what do you do to clean it and make sure that it's safe for those that are playing it, but also not deteriorating the piano itself? Because that's obviously very expensive.
And I researched it, and I did exactly what I was told, and it didn't work, So now I have these beautiful, I call them my COVID stains on the piano keys,
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think we've covered just about everything. I feel bad for my musician friends, that especially the ones that work full time doing that work. Luckily, I don't have to play music for a living, but it has always been a big part of my living. But I can do without that, although I miss playing and I miss audiences. But I feel bad for my musician friends that are just out of work, and whether that'll ever come back.
And that's one of the big questions. All these clubs that have closed and have no business, what are they going to do in the long run?
Yeah, I've been very nostalgic about that, thinking about, there was a time in my life when I was playing 4 or 5 nights a week out in clubs, and, it was just a hooting and a hollering and carrying on, and, everybody was having a great time. And, little by little over the years, that whole scene has changed immensely, but now it's just non-existent.
Right. I mean, we were scheduled to do a History Where You Eat with the Nelson Odeon being part of it, to kind of help people understand the history of that building and how you can turn a building that was once, in this case, a Grange Hall, into something that is honoring your past and allowing it to have new life in the present.
Yeah.
I hope that we get to do that again.
Well, they
with a number of buildings that were around there, the old auction hall, and
we'll get back to that eventually.
We hope.
Yeah, and the Odeon is working on reinventing themselves too. They've added an outdoor stage, and for the month of September, they had I think 3 or 4 shows.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to do this.
They've done a good job with it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
We hope to see you in better times, and hopefully we get that presentation on the census out at some point.
That would be nice. Like you said, maybe 2030.
2030, we'll get back to it. All right,
Yeah.
Laine. Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Matt.
You too.